With a total volume of only 2.3 liters, this mini PC is putting out some amazing performance. I mean, being able to run Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p high like this is absolutely amazing. Hey, what's going on everybody? It's etaprime back here again. Today we're going to be putting together a really powerful super small form factor PC using this Dell Precision 3240. So this is still coming in really small, and I actually had no clue that these existed until one of my good buddies messaged me about it. He sent me a couple eBay links and I started looking into it, and these are very, very promising. And as you'll see in this video, you can actually put together a really powerful PC with a small form factor unit like this. And the price on these is coming down quite a bit, and for what we have here, I think it would be worth putting something like this together. This is actually powered by a 10th gen Intel CPU. I think you can pick up an i3 and an i5 variant. And the one I have here happens to have an i5-10500. So we've got 6 cores, 12 threads, and we'll definitely need to add a GPU to this. But before we go any further, I do want to mention that this video is brought to you by URCD keys. I've actually been using this site for a couple years now. They do offer Steam keys, Origin, Uplay. They even offer Microsoft applications like Office. But the main reason that I use URCD keys is for their Windows keys. Right now, their Windows 10 Pro OEM key is $19.84, but if you use code ETA at checkout, you can get 25% off. And another great thing about buying from here is they do accept PayPal. I just did this build here. I need to activate Windows. I'm going to head over to my updates and security. We're going to go to activation. As you can see, I've got Windows 10 Pro, but it's not activated. So I'm going to change product key. I'm going to paste it in here, choose next. Choose activate, and Windows is now activated. We're ready to go. My warning is totally gone, and basically that's it. They'll email your code once your payment is processed, and that's basically it. If you're interested in picking up cheap Windows 10 keys for your new PC builds, I'll leave a link in the description. So this is an ultra tiny Dell workstation, and in fact some of these came with a single slot Quadro GPU. If you look around back here, you can see we've got enough room for a single slot the way it is, but with some modification to the case or the GPU itself, we can actually fit the most powerful low profile dual slot GPU that's on the market right now, known as the RTX A2000, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing to this thing today. I picked this one up bare bones, so it didn't come with any storage or RAM. I have tested it out just to make sure everything works, and without a GPU, we're good. We've got a UHD 630 graphics with that 10500 CPU, but we're not going to be able to game much on that. So we definitely want to add a GPU here, and there's not much room to work with. But the way Dell has set this up is pretty neat. So if we pull this off, you'll notice that we've got a PCIe riser card. And with the ones that came with a Quadro, it's going to be slotted right in there, just a single slot GPU. And if you wanted to go with something like, let's say an RX 6400, it's going to fit in here without any kind of modification. But if you want to go dual slot, you will need to do a little bit of cutting. So what I did was just cut the edge off right here with the removable piece and the stationary piece. It's a little edge that comes out about 1/4 of an inch, really easy to cut through. And now with that removed, we can actually fit this dual slot A2000 GPU. So this one here came with a full size bracket, and I've ordered the low profile bracket for it, but it's shipping from China and it's been a couple months. I don't think it's going to show up. So what I've done is just remove the full size bracket, and I ordered a bracket for another Quadro GPU, but this one's a single slot. Now the mini display ports do line right up, and once everything's put together, I think it's going to fit in here really nicely. But the first thing I want to do is replace the thermal paste on this CPU. I always like doing this, especially with these office PCs. I just wanted to see if it was dried out, and it's actually not dried out. I mean, we're working with the 10th gen here, so it's not terribly old like the 3000 and 4000 series mini PCs we usually look at. But it's still good practice to go ahead and replace that. And since this was a bare bones unit, I do need to add some RAM and storage. I'm going with 16 gigabytes of DDR4. This will only run it up to 2666 in this PC, and I've opted to use a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD. We've actually got 2 slots in this unit. This already came with a Wi-Fi and Bluetooth module, so I don't need to worry about that, but I need to get the cooling fan back in, and then we can take a look at how this GPU fits in here. So straight off the bat, like I mentioned, you will need to do a little bit of cutting either to the GPU or the case itself, but we should be able to fit this right in here. It's going to slot right in with this little custom PCIe riser that they have here. If you do end up ordering one of these mini PCs from eBay, ask the seller if it comes with the riser. Just make sure you have that because they're like $30 by themselves, and I know people like to part these things out. If you're not familiar with the RTX A2000, performance is on par with an RTX 3050 at its stock clocks, but when overclocking the A2000, it can definitely beat it out. So just give you a closer look here, I've cut a little bit of the stationary bracket here, and on the removable bracket, just 1/4 of an inch, used a Dremel to get it off of there. It's really not that much work, and it came off really easily. So I've got the GPU installed with that single slot low profile bracket just to kind of hold everything in place. And the A2000 doesn't require any extra power connectors. It's going to pull everything from that PCIe slot, and it'll pull only up to 75 watts, which does sound like a lot for a mini PC like this. But this came with a 240 watt external power supply. Some of these come with a 180, so just double check the listing if you're buying one of these used. And given that the i5-10500 is a 65 watt part, we're going to have plenty of power here. And just taking a quick look at it, everything fits in here really nicely, nothing sticking out of the edges, so we can put the case right back on this unit. And once it's all assembled, it looks something like this. We've got basically a stock setup. Even though I did a little bit of internal cutting, we really can't tell. I did nick the back paint there, but I'm not too worried about it. So with everything ready to go, it's time to test this thing out. I've installed Windows 11 Pro on that 1TB NVMe SSD. We'll go ahead and get right into it. So far, so good, and like I mentioned, this one came with a 240 watt power supply. I will be checking out the total power consumption by the end of the video, but as you can see, we've got that i5-10500, 6 cores, 12 threads. I've added 16 gigabytes of DDR4 running at 2666. We've still got access to the built-in Intel UHD 630 graphics, but the main claim to fame now is that RTX A2000 GPU. We've got 6 gigabytes of GDDR6 VRAM, and this thing screams. I mean, it definitely puts out some really amazing performance for the form factor. So we're going to jump right into it with some AAA games, but I'm going to go ahead and move over to my game capture device so we can get a better look at everything. And first up, we've got Cyberpunk 2077, 1080p, high, no resolution scale. We're not using DLSS or FSR. Looking good here, we're getting an average of around 78 FPS, but if you take a look at my CPU temp, we're up there in the 90s right now. This is a 65 watt part, and as you can see, we're pulling around 45 watts. I know these things are going to run a little hotter given the form factor, but I think I can do a little bit of adjusting from the BIOS, so I'm going to jump over there right now. And just taking a look in here, under power management, thermal control, it's set to quiet. So what we're going to do is just set it to optimized. I wish there was more tuning we could do here, but we're working with an OEM system. Optimized is going to up that fan speed and hopefully keep it a lot cooler. And next up, we've got Spiderman Miles Morales, 1080p high settings, no FSR, no DLSS. We're getting an average of around 76 FPS. And if you take a look at that CPU temp now, we're not at 90 degrees Celsius, but I will say that this is pulling a little less wattage than Cyberpunk was. But either way you look at it, that optimized setting from the BIOS definitely helped out with that CPU temp. And it really didn't make it that loud. It's not at full blast or anything like that. Now once this hits around 90 degrees Celsius, that fan does kick on pretty loud, but if we can stay under 85, we're good. Next thing I wanted to do was take a look at some benchmarks, and first up we've got Geekbench 6 coming in with a respectable 1,489 on the single core and 6,179 on multi. Moving over to some GPU benchmarks with 3D Mark, Night Raid 40,289, Firestrike 14,876, and finally Time Spy with a 6,465. I'm not complaining at all with these synthetics. Given the form factor of this unit, these are looking like some really great scores. This little setup also did a great job with God of War, 1080p high, and DLSS is set to quality right now. I don't think we're going to need it. But it was set up like this from my last testing, so I just left it right there, and we're getting an average of around 81 FPS with this game. And now that we've got that CPU working a little harder with God of War, the temps are up to around 81, which isn't bad at all for a tiny PC like this. Elden Ring is another one I always like to test on these PCs, and you know, from my last build, which had a 9th gen i5, we're seeing a dramatic increase in performance with this A2000. Really comes down to having those extra threads there with this 10th gen, and we're at high settings, 1080p, running at 60. So yeah, this is another really playable title on this mini PC. Now, older AAA games do work well at 1440p on the A2000. Here we have Injustice 2, 1440p maxed out, so we're at very high settings here. Constant 60. With these fighting games, you shouldn't have an issue. Street Fighter, you can definitely max out at 1440p, but when it comes to something like Mortal Kombat 11, you will have to drop it down to high settings 1440p, or you can go up to very high ultra settings at 1080. Of course, GTA 5 is going to work great on this little setup. 1440p, very high, we're getting an average of around 103 FPS. There's a chance we could take this down to high settings and go to 4K, turn VSync on, and play all day with it. Dirt 5 did a lot better than I thought it would. We're at 1080p high with no dynamic resolution scale. We're right there at an average of 86 FPS with this game. If you've ever tried to run this on a lower end system, you know how hard it can be to run. And to tell you the truth, this really isn't a lower end system. I'd consider it a mid-range, but it's still awesome to see that basically all of these games that I tested ran really well. And the final one I wanted to test here was Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. We're using the built-in benchmark. Recommended settings, but I do have scaling completely off. We're at 1080p. I wanted to see what we could do here, and it's pretty impressive what this little setup did with this game. We got an average of 108 FPS. We only had a low of 74, and if you take a look, we're at a true 1080 with no scaling, no dynamic resolution scale. Now, one of the concerns I had going into this was power consumption. Some of these come with a 180 watt power supply, some of them come with a 240 watt power supply, and with this one we got the 240 watt. While I was doing my testing, I plugged this into a kilowatt meter just so we could see if we were overdrawn from that power supply, and at idle, this is only 23 watts, not bad. Average gaming, 134, and in an extreme test, maxing out all 6 cores and 12 threads on the CPU and maxing out the RTX A2000, we pulled 172 watts from the wall. So if you've got that 180 watt power supply, it's right on the edge with an extreme test. But if you were just gaming on this in everyday normal use, you're not going to see that kind of wattage. So in the end, very impressed with the performance this thing's putting out, and I absolutely love the form factor. When it comes to I/O, I mean, we've got plenty of it here. USB Type-C up front, USB 3.1. Round back, we've got 4 more 3.1 ports, and this thing went together relatively easy. There was a bit of cutting that I needed to do to the case itself. You could cut the shroud on the GPU if you wanted to, but I'm going to be using this in other builds, so I just cut the case. I didn't have to hack it up or anything like that, and to tell you the truth, you know, if this showed up and it was already cut, I wouldn't even really know the difference. Now, you could always go with the GTX 1050 low profile or a 1650 or a single slot. But one thing I'd actually like to do with this is install SteamOS 3, otherwise known as Steam Deck OS, and unfortunately it doesn't pair well with Nvidia cards due to the updates to GameScope that Valve has done. But I do have this Radeon RX 6400. It's not going to be on par with the A2000, but we still might be able to do some really good 1080p Linux gaming on this little machine. So if that's something you're interested in seeing, let me know in the comments below. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. If you've got any questions or if there's anything else you want to see running on this rig, just let me know in the comments below. And I'm also going to leave some links to eBay where you can pick one of these up, along with links to Amazon for one of those used RTX A2000 GPUs. If you're looking to build a small form factor gaming PC, I think this is actually a really good little setup that you can do for relatively cheap. Let me know what you thought about the performance and form factor in the comments below. And like always, thanks for watching.